Welcome back to Close Up. Congressman Ro Khanna is headlining the New Hampshire Democratic Party's McIntyre-Shaheen Dinner, one of its major fundraisers. While other Democrats, including those who've run here in the First in the Nation primary, can't be bothered to say one good thing about the Granite State or its traditional role in presidential politics that elevates the people over all other interests, Congressman Khanna is standing with New Hampshire and the local Democratic Party as it endures this siege for the DNC. And the Congressman is our guest this morning on Close Up. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So many of your other colleagues aren't willing to go there and say that New Hampshire does something special, which is essentially put the people above all other interests, as I mentioned. You know, what you've been willing to do is say, hey, there's something valuable here. There's a culture of civic engagement, and we shouldn't walk away from it. Why are you standing up for this state that's so far away from where you live and serve?
Well, it's pretty obvious to me when I've come here, people take their duty very seriously. They take their expertise seriously, and it's been a tradition for over 70 years. And my view is that the Granite State Democrats actually have no control over the decision. They shouldn't be penalized. So I believe the president should campaign here, and this needs to be part of the early state process.
The critique over a lack of diversity in New Hampshire is real, and this state is not that diverse, although it is growing more so. And there are people on the Democratic side of the aisle who will contend either explicitly or implicitly that it is an act of racism for New Hampshire to uphold this tradition and vote first. What do you think of that argument?
Well, first of all, I think there's more diversity here than people give it credit for, and I would just give it free advice to anyone campaigning here. Make sure you go and look at the Asian American community, the Bhutanese community, the Latino community. You got Same, a high school kid here who's actually heading up the entire high school Democrats. But secondly, I think we have to look at the diversity holistically. And if you have South Carolina, Nevada, and New Hampshire as all of the early states, then that is diverse. You have the African American community, Latino, Asian American, but you also have here places like rural communities, North Country, where manufacturing left. Those folks deserve a voice too. And so I think we want to have the entire diversity of the country represented, not writing some places off.
You are fully on board with Joe Biden in 2020, and you have said it would be a mistake for him not to campaign here in New Hampshire, not to put his name on the ballot for the First in the Nation primary. Are you telling him that if and when you see him in person?
Adam, I've told some of his folks that. They didn't love it that I've said that, but I believe, here's what I would say to the president. Why are you messing with sort of Irish luck? You did this calendar in 2020. It worked out for you. You became president. Politicians are a superstitious bunch. If I were him, I'd say, why mess with anything that worked? Let me go campaign in every state that I did in 2020. And by the way, Adam, here's the problem if he doesn't do that. We just saw 2 days ago, everyone's talking about Donald Trump's town hall here. Do we really want all of 2023 to let Trump and Pence and DeSantis have the oxygen? I think the president has to be out here. His surrogates have to be out here. We've got to make the case for why the president is delivering.
What about the age factor? Senator Hassan was on this program last week. I asked her about this question, and she didn't really want to answer it. Are you worried at all about the prospect of having an 86-year-old human being in the Oval Office in the year 2028?
Well, look, 80 is the new 60 years. Age is not a barrier if you can do the job. And the president, I believe, can do the job. There are advantages to age, too. Wisdom on foreign policy, for example. He has had the ability, because of all his years of service, to put together a very important coalition to make sure we're standing with Ukraine. He's had judgment in dealing with China. But I think the president has to answer those questions openly, just like if someone was young running, and make the case. And that's why I think he ought to be campaigning in every state so he can make that case and assure people that he's up to the task.
You represent in Congress one of the most remarkable and dynamic places on planet Earth, the Silicon Valley,
I think so.
Economic engine and whatnot. But you are a native of Pennsylvania, I think, just outside of Philadelphia, right? So I'm curious, you in your being kind of bridge this divide in the Democratic Party between sort of the high-level, elite, educated folks and also coming from a place that's so working class and blue collar. How does the Democratic Party hold that coalition together in the decades to come?
That's probably the best description of what I aspire to do. Look, I grew up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, a Rockies fan, Eagles fan, and I understand why people in certain communities have felt left out of globalization, factory towns that have shut down, places that haven't had economic prosperity. But I also understand what technology can do, $10 trillion of market value in my district. And what I think we need to do, I call it a new economic patriotism. Let's bring these job opportunities, economic prosperity, new factories to places around the country and have a common project. The economic revitalization of this country. That's what can bring us together as a nation.
Reshoring those manufacturing jobs. A lot of people have talked about it. No one has been able to bring it back, and maybe it'll never come back in the way that it was, you know, through the 70s and 80s. But how do you make that promise work?
Well, you don't promise something that you can't do. You don't say, look, everything is going to be like the 1960s and 1970s and we're going to have all the old factories. That's just not true. But you say we have actually now new technology that allows for new productivity. And we can do things such as having federal financing of our factories in places. I'm going to call for 100 new factories in 100 small towns. We can do this. We did this under Hamilton. We did this under FDR. We need federal financing. We need new technology. We need the investment in workers there. And we have to look at what those factories can be for. So maybe it's not traditional paper, but now we need corrugated boxes for Amazon boxes. Now we need some recycling paper for takeout. Let's look at what the new industries are going to be.
Putting those 100 factories in 100 locations, how do you get the workers there if those rural areas have been sapped of that power over the years?
It's a big challenge. I was up in Berlin in North Country, and they said we actually can't have another paper line here because we just don't have the workers. This was a mistake, Adam, we made. I mean, we just watched manufacturing atrophy for 40 years, expertise decline. What we need to do is then invest. I think if we said the jobs are there and we're willing to invest and we're willing to recruit people, I think we would be able to build up that capacity to do that. But we need to be willing to make the federal investment with the private sector. It has to be a collaboration. Coming
from California, you have a bit of a different perspective on the immigration issue. I used to work there, and you know the Central Valley is one of the reddest parts of that state, and you never hear a peep about illegal immigration because it's such a huge part of the agricultural economy. On the Democratic side in Washington, there seems to be a similar kind of reticence about what's going on right now at the southern border and these migrant surges. Do you consider it to be a serious problem that tens of thousands of people are crossing the border right now?
Yes. Look, I'm the son of immigrants. I love the fact that this country is open to immigrants, but there has to be a process. We have to secure the border, and we need to make sure that people who are coming here come through a process. And what we need there is more people to process the asylum claims. We need to make sure that they're legitimate asylum claims. You can't just come here for economic opportunity and expect to come in as an asylum applicant. And I think actually there's bipartisan common sense solutions that can solve this issue. Most people want us to be a nation of immigrants, but they also want us to be a nation of laws.
In the decades to come, what if this problem gets worse? We hear about climate refugees, and a lot of these people coming to the southern border, they aren't necessarily just from Central and South America. They come from all over the world. So what if we start to see not just tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands of people massing on that southern border?
Well, I think we can prevent that. We can prevent that, one, by rational foreign policy towards Venezuela and Cuba. I mean, all of this argument that we need to have just punitive sanctions. I'm no fan of Maduro, but those punitive sanctions are leading to more refugees coming on our border. So let's have a rational sanction policy. Let's have a rational foreign policy that actually is dealing with communities facing climate, so you don't have massive refugee flows. Only 3% of people actually even contemplate leaving, and there's foreign policy that we can take to mitigate that. But finally, we need a secure border, and Democrats can work with Republicans to see how we secure that border. And we should be clear that we want people to come the legal process. I mean, not just show up without the process.
All right, Congressman Ro Khanna, thanks for joining us on Close Up. We'll see you back here in New Hampshire in the future.
Thank you.
All right.